Okay.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
And I want to do this one because Doug just joined us. I wanted Doug to see this slide first because Doug just joined us. So we're gonna we're gonna go on from here, Allison. So
All right. So do you want me to just repeat what we've already said?
yeah, but for this slide, sure. Yeah.
All right. So first of all, was I going too fast when I was talking earlier?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. If I start talking too fast, let me know. So culture is much more than an understanding of language, because language is important, but it's really that gateway into understanding a culture, an introduction, not the crash course version. And culture compared to language is the bigger challenge to outsiders, because language is easy to learn. Culture is not quite so easy, and it leads to significantly more cultural differences and misunderstandings than someone who simply struggles with the language. So we can go on to the next slide.
I was just going to ask, what are we seeing here? What is this graph telling us?
So what the graph is it's the visual representation of the slide that was right before that. Okay. And I will go over what all of these are.
Okay, perfect.
I'm going to move this over here so I can keep track. Go to the slide above that where it has, yeah, that one. So these are all different ways to understand how cultures can differ. And it's not like a set in stone. This is how they are. This is how it's different, because you have individuals, you have groups within countries, you have everything involved in that. But the first one is power distance. And power distance is the attitude of the culture toward those power inequalities among us and how we accept power distribution. So low power distance, which is the three on the left, which are the Western countries, they're not as low as quite a few countries, but a low power distance is a flat egalitarian organization, whereas the higher the number, the more of a hierarchical country it is or culture it is. So in the US, for example, we tend to have a relatively flat egalitarian setup in business and everyday life, compared to if we're looking at China, you have a very high power distance and you have a very hierarchical society. Individualism is the degree of interdependence of a society and how it maintains that interdependence among its members. So is it I or is it we? The higher the number, it's very much I. I am going to get a job. I am going to succeed. I am going to do this, compared to a more collectivist society, which are the three on the right, where it's much more of a we. We're looking at group societies, taking care of others in exchange for loyalty, and looking at the bigger group instead of individualism. Masculine and feminine. We don't have a better term for this yet, but this is how the studies have actually gone. A high score, masculine, is very driven by competition, achievement, and success, whereas the feminine score is going to be much more about the group and caring and nurturing. The uncertainty avoidance is the way a society deals with the fact that the future can never be known. How do we control the future? Do we control the future? Do we just let it happen? A low score is the tolerance for ambiguity in structure and procedures. And a high score is we want predictability. Which way are you? Is it something where it's very flexible? We're just going to see how it goes? Or is it, this is what it is, this is how we're doing it, and do not stray from the way we're going to move forward? Long and short-term outlook is how society looks to the past as well as the future. A low number on the graph is we like time-honored traditions and norms, and we view societal change with suspicion, where do we really want to change? We're going to look at things quickly. We want quarterly reports. How much have we made in 3 months? And what do we do for the next 3 months? Whereas a high score is going to look on a 10, 20, 30-year outlook of a business. And education and thrift is the way to prepare for the future. Indulgence is how we control our desires and impulses. And the ones that show restraint are going to have strong control over their urges. The others are going to be fond of leisure activities and want instant gratification, much more of a work hard, play hard mentality.
So obviously that's the high number.
Yes. Yep. Why would you think that, Todd? Why would you think? Yeah, the low number is going to be very
colors are way up in the sky, and then the yellower ones are down low.
Yeah.
So we can go on to... I'm surprised at the these three here on Japan, China, and sorry, SK, but
South Korea.
Yeah. So they're much more on short term,
long term.
Long term.
This is long term. Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense.
All numbers, we want instant gratification.
Absolutely.
Long term.
And the others are like, let's look. How are we going to do stuff in 100 years?
Those so we're looking. People that get frustrated in line at Wendy's.
Is there 100 years? Is there something out 100 years? I'm not sure. Anyway, okay, I get it.
What other questions? Any other questions on this slide? All right.
I've heard the third one, which you had masculine and feminine, described as competitiveness versus collaborative.
I like that. Because I've not been able to come up with a better term, but I like that.
Yeah, that's how I've heard that described, and that seems to be a little bit better because our norms of masculine and feminine in this regard have kind of broken down and changed a bit in the last 30, 40 years.
Right.
And so people are starting to not have such a simplistic definition of what that gender difference is.
Yeah, I like that. I will definitely fix it because I've not been able to come up with a different term yet.
Yeah.
So then this is a different scholar altogether. The last one, Hofstede, that was his way of looking at it. And this one is different. So context level is, do we have high context or low context? High context cultures, the Japan, China, South Korea. Contextual clues are important to the interpretation of a message. Low context, hi America. We need things written out. We need to know word for word what it is you want to say. We want it all written out in a contract. And if it's not explicitly said, we're probably not going to get it. So the low context cultures, we want straightforward, explicit. This is what we're saying. High context, you're looking at social norms, the situation, who's talking, who said it. And Todd and I had a wonderful discussion about some of this yesterday, where if we're looking at China, for example, if you take something out of context, you have no idea what's going on. Versus here in the US, for the most part, if it's written, you can say, oh, this is what it is because it's written out and I'm good to go. We can just move forward. And then the concept of time, which we also had a very interesting thing that I'd like to come back to later today, is how do we understand time? Is it something where you are punctual, you are right there, you 15 minutes early is on time and on time is late? That's me. Or is it, I'll show up when I show up, which is, for example, some of my Indian clients, where they say it's a 6 o'clock meeting You don't show up until 7:30 at the earliest because that's on time. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours late. And to me, in my brain, that makes no sense. But I see it with my Indian clients all the time. So how do we perceive time? And knowing that will definitely play a part in how we do business. Latin America, Arab nations, African nations are the highest scoring on the polychromatic time, or the ones where time is flexible. It's all situational. I'll show up when I show up. And German and Austria are the ones who score at a 1. So the Austrians and Germans are the ones who are like, yes, punctual. You will be there right then. All right. Ken, if you can go to the next slide. Have we moved? There we go. All right. So the last one is, how do we plan? Are we linear? Are we multi? Or are we linear active, multi-active, or reactive? So linear active is task-oriented, highly organized planners who prefer getting things done one task at a time. Multi-active is emotional, talkative, and impulsive. And feelings and relationships are more important than an agenda. And reactive is polite, attentive listeners who act on a conversation and want harmony and want to avoid embarrassment to themselves or others. So all of these put together start to form this picture of how does a specific culture or a specific society see life. And one is not wrong, one is not right. It's simply that insight so that people can adjust accordingly. Because if I'm going to Japan, I want to change my behavior to fit the way they see the world. And if I'm going to India, I want to make sure I'm not expecting them at 5 o'clock because the meeting's at 5 o'clock. I know 6:30, 7 o'clock we'll start, and we'll probably have a long extended conversation and build up the relationship before we ever talk business. So let's go to the next slide.
That Canada is down there with Singapore instead of close to the United States.
Mm.
And also Taiwan's missing, so it would probably go somewhere around Japan and Hong Kong.
Yeah, this is not the model I made.
This is a very interesting chart, I think. I'd like to learn more about this.
So Lainey, Dennis Lowe and I were actually discussing that last one earlier today. So she's also an intercultural specialist, and we were having a wonderful discussion about the Lewis model as well, because you put them all together. It's an introduction. You don't know until you meet the people. Because if you just come across the US, here are our numbers, but within the US, everyone's different themselves. It just kind of gives you that baseline to start from. So what is the value of it? Most of you probably already know because we're in an intercultural global chamber here. But there's several different things that provide a really high return on investment when you get this cultural support. Effective cultural support helps international businesses minimize the chances of making cultural blunders. They can lead to lawsuits, damaged reputation, lost sales. And the last thing a company wants is to make a terrible mistake in a new country simply because they lacked the correct knowledge or didn't have the correct support to give them the guidance they needed to make things or allow things to be done correctly or in a way that's acceptable to this other nation. Every business knows the importance of anticipating customer needs and reactions, but if you're expanding internationally, a lot of companies neglect to understand the market they're entering. So if they're not taking the time to understand the cultural norms, they're going to risk offending people, and that has serious consequences for business. This is the reason that international trade and trade contexts, many organizations are beginning to see the value in providing this service because they want to mitigate these risks before they happen instead of after they happen. I know for me, I am often called in after the mistakes have been made, and that is much more difficult to navigate than fixing the problems before they ever occur in something that causes a lawsuit or whatever. Domestic companies already have a hard time getting good employees, but an international company that is unaware of expectations by American employees, or an American business not understanding the expectations of a German employee or whatever, you're going to be having a huge turnover of your talent, and that is expensive. And you don't want that to happen. So having that specialist on board, even if it's just someone on retainer to ask those questions or to come in and do a full training and review of practices, having that specialists helps someone understand the culture and adapt the business from the home culture to whichever country they have expanded to. And that allows them to keep the good employees, because that can be tens of thousands of dollars each time you have to get a new employee. And we've had sales calls go completely wrong before. But for international companies, it can be much more than just a sale went wrong. It can be offending the other person without ever realizing it. And that's never how you want to do business. So investing in that training of the sales teams, investing in the training of management so that they can understand the verbal and nonverbal cues that are going on in a meeting is so important. Because if I've had some of my Japanese clients, they'll sit back and they'll just close their eyes. In the US, we're going to think they just fell asleep in the middle of my presentation. What's going on? Compared to, oh, they're just thinking it through and they're actually listening. That's how they're actively listening. But those are both nonverbal things that are often overlooked when we're having these discussions. And you don't always pick up on them beforehand. All right. Are we good right now? Anyone have any questions?
I will say that I've had Japanese people fall asleep in my presentations.
But not always. That does not always mean. I've had people fall asleep with their eyes open still, Doug. It's not just sleeping with your eyes closed. I've had people fall asleep with their eyes open, which is a pretty good skill, I must
You
admit.
have to always give people the benefit of the doubt for jet lag, because about 2, 3 in the afternoon, right at meeting time.
Yeah, or
That-
people who are staying up after midnight to attend the meeting because it's with somebody in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've done that. I've been up at 2 a.m. to have that Japanese call. So yeah, I love it when it's like, yep, we're good, and they're completely passed out. So some of the areas that are often overlooked, this is much more on a business thing where you're bringing expats over, but spouses and families are frequently overlooked, and honestly, they're forgotten during the relocation and transition period, because we're looking at employees. Okay, is the employee ready to go? But you have the wife, typically in my field, it's often the wife, but you have the spouse, you have the families that have no idea what's going on. They have even less idea than the spouse that has been transferred. And that leads to an anxious employee as well, because they're going to spend their entire time thinking about their spouse and family. So that familial support is just as important as employee support. But we also have the everyday basics, healthcare, getting kids into school, looking for houses and leases, and dealing with these contracts. That's exhausting for people in the US, let alone for people that don't speak the language, don't understand the culture in a native capacity, and leaving them to their own devices. That is incredibly terrifying and frustrating. The idea of community. when someone leaves their home and enters a new area, if they're not introduced to the Japanese community, for example, that's the one I'm most frequently working with. We have a Japanese school in Cincinnati. If they don't know where that is, they don't have their community, because that is the Japanese community. And it seems like such an easy thing. We'll just look it up. But if you don't know what the words are, if you don't know it exists, if you don't know what you don't know, how do you know what to look for? So having someone that's local understand, here are the things I typically see, and I can get you up and running quickly with a security system, the emotional security, the community, the mental health, because that's dealing with a lot of depression, anxiety, isolation, fear. The family also is a lot of worthlessness. They feel very isolated. So the community and mental health go together. But supportive resources, whether that's an individual, a good working environment, or a Japanese or foreign community for someone to lean on, those resources are crucial to making sure employees are effective. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is the one I would love to hear what people have to say. What cultural blunders have you made?
Allison,
I have made several. Yeah.
just to let you know,
Todd.
we're 8 minutes till the hour.
Got it. All right. So who's made cultural blunders? I have made tons of them, including my first introduction with the Japanese, because they came over and like, hi, how are you? They gave me their business cards and bowed and did everything. I'm going, what is going on? I have no idea why you're doing it. Okay, I will smile and nod, because I have found that to be a very safe answer to everything, is you just smile and nod, even if you have no idea what's going on. No one gets offended, and it gives you time to think. And I still had no idea what was going on. And then they're asking me for my business card. And this was at a time where I didn't have any, because that wasn't how I was thinking. I was thinking as an English teacher, not as a business person. And thankfully, I had great Japanese partners that just laughed it off. But for me, that was like the first shock. It was like, why are we bowing? And why is everyone looking at me like this? And what is going on? I have no idea. So I'd love to hear what other people have done or come across, because we've all made them. Todd, I'm going to call on you.
You're gonna call on me?
I'm going to call on you.
I'm gonna call on Lauren.
Oh, you're going to call on Lauren. Okay.
Yeah.
I was racking my brain because I was like, I know I must have done this about a million times. And one of the things that came to mind, I was traveling in Egypt, and it was April, and it was warm. And I made the mistake of wearing short sleeve shirt, and I got a lot of looks for that, and some comments that just cultural custom. Typically, women wore more clothes, long sleeves, long skirts, and so I had worn long trousers. And I wore the short sleeves, and that was just definitely not the custom there, and not part of that culture. So that was something they all kind of looked at, and they were like, And I was traveling with one of my male friends, and everyone thought that we were married because it was the culture, so it was definitely very different from what I was used to.
So
That's a good one.
Yeah, we had an interesting thing in Singapore years and years ago, when my wife came with me on business for, I think we were over there for 6 weeks or something like that in Singapore. And of course, Singapore has all these different districts, which are just fabulous. And so we were trying to go and visit all of these different districts. So the kind of the one faux pas, she was, I think 7.5 months pregnant at the time. And of course, in Asia, to be out in public. And so, pregnant was interesting. And then one night we went, it happened to be I don't actually know what was going on, but every male, and it was a Middle Eastern district, and every male was in the street, but there was nobody else. I mean, there was no females or anything. We kind of walked through there, and we were looked at, very strangely going through at that time. It was very uncomfortable with her being, so
I
pregnant.
can imagine.
Yeah, it was just a great experience for us. It was very eye-opening.
All right. I'll go ahead and wrap up. So if you can go to the last slide, please, Ken.
So I was just going to say, I'm going to share a video with everybody where I talk about linguistic faux pas, because that's really the biggest faux pas that I've had in my experiences with all that stuff.
The linguistic ones.
Yeah, I just shared it with Allison and not with everyone else. So here, if you guys are interested.
I'm so special. Thank you. So the ways to really support someone, whether it's an international team, if you're in business, or even if you just know someone who has migrated to a new country, be empathetic, be patient, provide open communications and transparency in what you're trying to say, and provide cross-cultural resources. Very simple, but the empathy is often overlooked so much, and the patience is as well. So those are really my 4 overarching things. So thank you guys. I appreciate letting me come on and talk about things that I love.
Yeah, I think this is a great talk. I think, we could go into a lot more detail on some of the
Yeah,
different,
this was very high
theories, level. Yeah, and all of that. I really think, and I'm going to kind of throw this out at Doug. I think, Doug, you should try and pull together, these kind of resources, like Allison and a few other people that do this type of thing, and try and have a panel or group, to really help get the message out through the global chamber, since this is a global organization, and these folks have really been at the forefront of trying to help, with that. And maybe there's a forum already or whatever, but I really think we should, get these folks out on the global chamber platform to try and, maybe as a panel, maybe as a group or something like that, to try and just help educate people on, how not to be so American, I guess.
I mean, that's how our brains are set up. So it's hard to break out of it, even if we are global businesses. Todd was helping me on a few things. We were reviewing some of the document, and there were things that I hadn't even thought of. I was trying to just shorten, and it inadvertently made it where something was considered normal. But I was just trying to shorten it. That's all I was trying to do. But my American brain, that's what it did. And it made it sound like something was the default setting, and it wasn't. Just like we were talking about masculine versus feminine, I really like the other terms because it changes the context. It turns everything to the way it needs to be understood, because words matter.
Yeah, I agree with I agree with Allison what you're saying, and certainly Ken, this is one of those topics that is recurring. This is one that, whether it's international law or international banking or international accounting, international tax, there's things that every international person needs to know, and one of them is the cross-cultural, right? So we, about once a quarter, have an event like this. We just did one in Clubhouse maybe 2 weeks ago, something like that, with some cross-cultural. I think the topic was building trust across cultures. So some of these types of things come up. If you have some ideas maybe some contextual ideas in terms of what you'd like to do, to spin it a different way. I think that's part of what makes it interesting. I thought today's was really good summary, and a really good description of some of the different ways that it can be measured. These things can be measured, which I think is essential, because why should you have to work 10, 20, 30 years and make all sorts of faux pas to learn all the from your screw ups, right? That's ideally not the way you want to learn. You want to have Allison tell you about these potential screw ups and only make a few of them, and have most of them savable in terms of your business or your relationship or whatever you want to do. So totally agree. So if anybody has ideas around how to twist it, the one on Clubhouse was, I thought it was interesting, building trust, across cultures. That's kind of what we need to do, right? So, and you have to understand people and where they're coming from to be able to build trust, because if you don't respect them and where they're coming from, they're not going to trust you, right? It's just kind of basic business 101. So let's keep finding ways to get the message out and to educate, because still, even, people like Todd, obviously, totally immersed, and so gets it, and is very sensitive to all of that. A lot of people that I think all of us run into that are doing international business, especially if it's not primary, they can forget, and they can get lost, or they can get busy. And so they just kind of revert back to whatever they're doing, and they forget that whatever they're doing is their own stuff, So let's keep it front and center for sure. Thanks, Allison. Really good job today.
No problem.
Yes.
Yeah, we revert to what's safe and what we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, Allison, what was most powerful about this is that I've learned that it's really about the mindset that you bring to something. And you're going to make mistakes, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't yet know and you got to learn and all this kind of stuff. But it's just being open to the possibility that people think differently than you do. And honestly, that's just as useful here in the United States. That's one of the things that caused so much anxiety last year and internal conflict, is not admitting that people might think differently than I do. And so it's a national thing, and as well as international.
Yeah.
It really is, because even within the US, we could really niche it down, because we have the Asians, we have the Asian American, we have the Korean American, the Japanese American, but we also have the Black community, we have the Latin community, we have all these communities that have their own cultures within the American culture, within the global culture. So it depends on how much you want to niche it down. I deal with
every
country to
company and organization has its own culture.
Exactly.
We've got left versus right has emerged as a big thing. I mean, holy cow.
Yeah.
This is actually, I don't know what the split in China is, but I'm guessing it's something like what Japan has been. So Japan, at one point in the last couple decades, has been 99.8 or 99.9% Japanese or Korean, and I think 0.2% was Korean and Chinese combined, and there was some little bit of Filipino. So basically, Japan is homogeneous, right? It's 99.7% Japanese and Asian, and mostly Japanese. China's got to be something similar to that. So one of the things I've always believed in is that the U.S. is in a great position to be much smarter, about culture. Unfortunately, we're not, in many ways. There are plenty of smart people about it, but there's also a lot of dumb people about it. And so, but it is an opportunity. Europe, one of the cool things about Europe, right, is that, they are generally European, but they are from different cultures. There is some diversity amongst all of that, so they have an opportunity as well. But they honestly aren't that comfortable with Asians generally, because there's not that many. So we do have an opportunity, and certainly those of us doing international business have a great opportunity, right, to be a lot smarter and to teach people and pull Allison in when people don't listen.
Well, I think we should take this kind of as an aside, and maybe, for the folks that are very, very interested in digging a little deeper with this, Allison, Todd, Lauren, Carl, if you're interested in this as well, let's get a smaller group together and really take Doug's challenge of, what's a different way to approach this and a different way to get this word out to people about culture, and really propose that to the Global Chamber, because we've got how many people, nine people who are listening to this today. I'd like to see 100. I'd like to see 100 people in one of these calls talking about global culture. And I think that, if we get a small group together and really brainstorm, maybe this some approach that we could take, a panel, I don't know. I don't really know what, but
one idea that you might think of is the people sometimes learn from mistakes, and so you could almost have, I don't know, I always hesitate to name this particular group, but there is a group called the F Up group, and they actually spell out the word. And it's an organization that's based in Mexico City, and they basically have people get up on stage and explain how stupid they were with their business, and it's a kind of a fun / learning experience, and people kind of have fun, kind of laughing at the person, but ultimately really hopefully learning. I think that's probably a little bit of extreme, but if you had people come together and talk about some of the mistakes that they've made, and to some extent, laugh at each other, but also have experts like Allison in the room to say, hey, that's a common mistake, or that's an unusual mistake, or there's other mistakes that are like that, and to be able to kind of learn from it. Because if people are telling stories, people will remember, the stories and some of the mistakes that people made, and hopefully they'll be able to avoid some of those as well. So I could see how it could be kind of a fun interactive session, and perhaps get a decent population of people to come to hear how other people screwed up.
Yeah.
Especially people that are supposed to know better. And because Lainey and I were talking about it earlier today, some of the absolutely terrible mistakes we've made, and this is something we do. And Melissa Sanderson and I were talking about some of these huge mistakes we've made. So in our private conversations, we talk about, we're helping other people because we've made them, but we're wanting other people to learn from our mistakes and the mistakes we've seen our clients make.
It happens.
Talking about possibly putting together some sort of a larger, more extended talk about culture and culture differences, and talking about bringing in some other people. So Ken, I think that's a great idea, and I think it's really a valuable thing too when we can bring people together who can talk about different cultures. If we had a group that was like that graph that Allison used, that would be really neat. Going
that would be kind of cool too.
It would be fun.
And also the question of how did you use culture to be, to win? Knowing that you were walking into a room that had a different group of people, what did you do differently that changed the game for you, and maybe won a competition with versus other folks? And so there are certainly some fun things that could be done.
We could give people odd scenarios and ask how it would be reacted to in a different culture, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Todd and I were doing like an East-West even because those are where our focuses are.
You do a
But-
workshop on here's your products. So here's a group of Americans, here's a group of Japanese, here's a group
It's
of
so fun.
Swiss, get some extreme people and put people in different circumstances and have them retwist what they were going to say or do, in the meeting. So yeah,
That could be
you
interesting.
guys are being really creative now.
That sounds
Yeah,
like
so
so
Chris-
much fun. It sounds
sounds
so
like-
fun.
Looks like Chris has something he's dying to say here, so. No, he's.
Oh, no, I'm just listening. I mean, it was interesting that Doug brought in the matter of this. What do you call it, Doug? This is a group of people that were just chatting in the bar, and they had this idea of talk about their F-ups, and they created this organization that now is in hundreds and hundreds of cities around the world, and they share their mistakes when doing business. So it's something that became really, really well known all around the globe. So very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, they wanted me to be the Phoenix and the Tucson person. So I gave the Tucson one to Felipe Garcia, and I think he's still doing it, and also Juan Padres. So yeah, those are ways that we learn, right? Either, through a workshop where we have to adjust, or, you want a good attendance, so you don't want to make it too hard on people. Right. But when people are explaining some stories where they kind of messed up or how they adjusted, that's, to me, sounds like something that would be quite interesting, or could be really interesting. Another would be have like a keynote speaker, like somebody from a Google or Tesla or some kind of big entity like that, where they talk through some of the things that they go through. There's a lady that we know at Google in Spain that has already said she'd be open to speaking, and she works across cultures. So somebody like that with a high profile company could also bring some folks in as well. So
Ken, Otterbox.
Yep. Actually, we do need to follow up with them.
Yeah, because I
Carl,
know that stuff in China.
Yeah. So Carl, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I sent you a message there. There's some really good meat here. The question I had about Global Chamber overall is, I guess I had assumed that Global Chamber has resources like what we've talked about times 100, being such a larger organization. But maybe I'm over assuming about that.
Well, our resources are our members, right? So we have maybe a dozen members who have this cultural experience, and so when our members need help, we divert them to the resources. We also do events, and so, like I said, probably once a quarter or every couple months. I mean, having an event every day is overkill, right?
Sure.
doesn't really do. I don't think is really beneficial, because there's so many topics related to international business. So we know it's one of the top 20 topics, and so we keep it in its rotation. So that's why the thing that we did 2 weeks ago on Clubhouse, which was basically on this topic. So we still want to always continue to build our capabilities, but those capabilities are through the members, not us, meaning we're not the source of it. Where our members like Allison are the source, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that. So okay, so that's making a bit more sense to me now. I agree. Your resources are your Global Chamber members, and that totally makes sense. But in my mind, this subject is around the effectiveness of the people in organizations, in global, international organizations, whatever. And it's almost as if what else matters besides the people? I mean, everything else is stuff you can look up. It's logistic. There's tables and websites and resources and everything like that. The people are 1,000 times more complicated, and it's much, much, much deeper discussion when you say we are talking about how people relate. And so that to me is, in my mind, I always put it right at the top, because if you don't get the people stuff right, then none of the rest of the stuff matters.
It also is contextual. So in the sense of how does cross-cultural impact the selling process, right? How about, how does it impact managing an extended team? So we've had one of our members in Singapore, that's kind of his specialty, is how do you manage a team that is all around the world with different cultures and they're not in the same room at the same time? What are the things that you need to be able to do? And in fact, he wrote a book on that. So some of what, in fact, all of what we're talking about, right, is pretty contextual. And those are two of the key things is, hey, I'm selling across cultures. What do I do? Maybe I'm managing a distribution network across cultures. I'm managing a team across cultures. There are things like that that we face and that have so many, almost infinite number of case studies that you could talk about. So it has to be talked about a lot.
Actually, I was having a discussion with Todd about this, exactly this, doing a webinar on managing a globally dispersed cross-cultural team.
Yeah, I mean, it's
very,
becoming more
very
important,
rich
right?
area. Yeah, it ain't just time zones.
Yeah, with work from home, people are literally not together anymore, and you can live anywhere. So suddenly you've got teams. So that's a hot issue, no question.
Yeah. So, Todd, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to the folks here and see if we can pull together a smaller brainstorming group and potentially,
Okay.
get something lit on fire here with this topic. Allison has brought a great topic for us that I think speaks, to the global chamber quite well, and I think is going to drive a lot of interest. So,
I'm always
Doug-
game,
Doug's
whether
got
it's
some great-
moderating, helping,
Doug's got some great
background information,
ideas.
whatever.
I'm sending out my business email to everyone, so then you can connect with me.